Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you follow me on Twitter or on my blog or podcast, I'm sure you saw me talking about aligning your submission materials and really thinking about how each one further develops your elevator pitch or, your query letter pitch. Today, I wanted to do a little small case study that looks at the premise promise and how it's perceived by readers. More specifically, I want to delve into an example where your back cover copy promises one thing, but your opening chapters or setup kind of take an unpleasant left turn into a different reading experience. Because I know someone is going to want to at me on socials, this is no way an attack on this specific author or me talking smack about their writing. She has plenty of the people who enjoyed this book, and you may be one of them. But it's more focused on looking at the inherent promises you make versus how they unfold on page and how that dynamic could potentially impact the reader experience. Enough dawdling, let's get into the case study. The book I've picked for this video is Josh and Gemma Make a Baby by Sarah Reddy. I've listened to about 67% of the audiobook on script, at which point I knew the here wouldn't be personally satisfactory. But just in case you want to take a read of it, you can actually read the first 4 chapters using the Amazon Look Inside function, just so that you can get a gist of what I'm talking about. Let me just say this is an interesting book because it is well written in terms of the author's voice and having lots of humor that you'd expect a rom-com to have, and decent pacing. But market and structurally speaking, I'm not actually sold on the fact that it delivers on the premise, on the romance side of things particularly. In this case, the reader's main promise of the premise is delivered through the back cover copy, like I said before. It's what the reader uses to determine if this book is for them, and it should tell them about what the book is about. So let's just take a look at what Josh and Gemma's back cover copy promises. New Year's resolution: have a baby, preferably with Josh Lewenthal. Meet Gemma Jacobs. She's driven, energetic, and a positive thinker. She has a great career working for famed self-help guru Ian Fortune. She lives in a cute studio apartment in Manhattan, and her family is supportive and loving, albeit a little kooky. Her life is perfect, absolutely wonderful, except for one thing. After a decade of disastrous relationships and an infertility diagnosis, Gemma doesn't want a Mr. Right, or even a Mr. Right now. She just wants a baby, and all she needs is an egg, some sperm, and IVF. So Gemma makes a New Year's resolution: have a baby. Josh Lewenthal is a laid-back, relaxed, find the humor in life kind of guy, the polar opposite of Gemma. He's also her brother's best friend. For the past 20 years, Josh has attended every Jacobs family birthday, holiday, and event. He's always around. Gemma knows him. He's nice enough. He's funny-ish. He's healthy, she thinks. And he didn't burn any ants with a magnifying glass as a kid, which in Gemma's mind makes him the perfect option for a sperm donor. So Gemma wants to make a deal, an unemotional, business-like arrangement. No commitments, just a baby. To Gemma's surprise, Josh agrees. They have nothing in common except their agreement to make a baby and their desire to keep things business-like. But the thing about baby making, it's hard to keep it business-like. It's nearly impossible to keep it unemotional, and it's definitely impossible to keep your heart out of the mix. Because when you're making a baby together, things have a way of starting to feel like you're making other things too, like a life and a family and love. And when the baby making ends, you wish everything else didn't have to end too. So that's the back cover copy. Okay, so right there in that first line, we kind of have a signal of what kind of heroine this book will feature, right? She is a hard worker with a sunny disposition, right? She's driven, energetic, and a positive thinker. Once you hear the word cookie, I'm thinking family shenanigans, but also that they're supportive and loving, right? So we're gonna see weirdness happen, but from well-intentioned people. And like, if you know me, that's like my catnip right there. Okay, GMC's goal, have a baby. That is like right there. But also, this paragraph also kind of hints at drama with her ex. If you know me, I'm not a huge fan of like the return of the ex. Especially since it seems like the heroine has had a decade of bad relationships, and I mean, they're ex for a reason, right? So I'm hoping that the ex doesn't come back. But I do want to see her get her goal and live her best happy life and him not be in the picture. Great. So now we know what kind of hero we're talking about, right? Laid back, relaxed, kind of laugh through a situation kind of guy. You know, sometimes you just need laughter to get through the pain. Makes sense. They're opposites because, you know, she's super driven, he's laid back, she's very positive thinker, he's kind of a laugh it off, he doesn't take things too seriously. So we're kind of getting like an opposites attractee kind of vibe there. Another trope there, right? Like best brother's best friend. And so I'm expecting some kind of family drama about like, why you dating my friend, girl? And hopefully they keep it cute because sometimes the brothers be like kind of messy. So, right? So like this is hinting at her motivations for why she's choosing him, right? He's a familiar constant in her life. And really what that's saying is that he's safe, unlike her past relationships. Now we're looking at structure, right? The romantic arc will start as a business proposal of you give me sperm, I have baby. And it'll, of course, end up with the happily ever after because this is a romance or it's a rom-com. They're supposedly aligned in this desire for keep things impersonal to some degree. And then with the structure of like, keep it strictly just about making the baby. And now, you know, we see as their lives meld together. And it's giving me, as they learn more about each other, the business arrangement will become messy because, you know, feelings don't work that way. And then, of course, the conflict is her want, which is just having a baby. Like that's all she wants versus her need, which is fulfilling romantic relationships, right? She's been burned by her backstory, which is, of course, the decade of bad relationships and her ex-husband, I'm assuming. And so like what she really wants is a loving romantic relationship. So that's the conflict. So after reading the back cover copy, the reader gets a sense of who the characters are, why they're in each other's lives, namely their backstory, and where they are in their own lives, and how their structured business arrangement becomes the happily ever after. We also get a strong sense of the IVF process is very much the center of the story, and it's actually the catalyst for the romantic arc. So now let's take a look at some pivotal moments at the beginning of the book. And let me just say that traditional gender roles are well baked into this book, and the inherent slut shaming of girls or women, performative hypermasculinity of men, and the equivalence of fertility with femininity is pervasive throughout, for lack of a better word. So the first chapter is all about laying the groundwork and the backstory to show how not only Josh became a part of Gemma's life, that is, him and his dad moved into their small town and became the source of gossip right off the bat, while Gemma's older brother befriended him. But it also shows how Josh is perceived by Gemma's family. Josh is, in not so many words, labeled as a burgeoning fuckboy at 8 years old by Gemma's mom, because in her words, he's not the sort of boy that nice girls play with. Something her older sister reiterates when he's 18, saying he collects underwear for a hobby and pins them on his bedroom wall. He has almost every girl's undies in the whole town. He'll tear them off you and then do things. This is not the most flattering image of Josh. It's actually quite concerning that, like, you know, they talk about him that way because he's like a child at that point. But then, of course, to substantiate Josh's fuckboy status in the heroine's eyes, he does indeed steal her underwear, really, you know, take her virginity, in like the most cack-handed way when she's 16 on the floor of her garage, leaving her of the mind that Josh is just an immature, emotionally constipated user. Okay. Gemma then comes back from her walk on the wild side with Josh after a few weeks terrified that she was going to blow up like a birthday balloon and pop out a baby. And 6 years later, she's done the nice girl thing of getting married and divorced 6 months later by the age of 22. Chapter 2 then gives the reader a glimpse into the heroine's present, or more specifically, the circumstances that lead her to her decision to say, fuck it, I want a baby and I'm willing to go at it alone. And this is where I knew I would have DNF'd had I not been reading for study's sake and for the sake of a podcast episode that's coming out. Gemma's mom, part of her supposedly loving but albeit kooky family, calls her at work to talk about who she's planning on setting her daughter up with at her Wieners and Wine New Year's party. And of course, she manages to slip in the fact that Gemma's ex-husband, Jeremy, has just had his 3rd child in comparison to Gemma's sister's 4 kids. And this is how we find out that it's been 10 years since Gemma left her cheating ex after she walked in on him having wild monkey sex with some other woman on their dining room table just 2 weeks after Gemma was diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis and was told by a surgeon that she would never have kids. And in Gemma's mom's mind, the only man who is perfect for her is a mature 50-year-old man named Mort who doesn't want kids because it's quote unquote known around town that you're desperate. No one wants to date a mid-30s chubby divorcee with questionable fashion sense and a bum uterus. Woo. And of course, that other would-be eligible bachelors in their town are supposedly, quote unquote, looking for a wife and not a pity date. Yeah, very loving and kind there, Mom. So this conversation between Gemma and her mother is the inciting incident, the catalyst for Gemma deciding that since she's a dating pariah with no prospects or future, she will give up on waiting for a good man to help her dream come true. And she will fulfill that dream of having a family, a baby, without a man and make a future happiness for herself. To cut the long story short, Gemma, after a very traumatic interaction with the IVF specialist, decides that she wants her brother's best friend and the taker of her virginity, Josh, to be her baby daddy. No strings attached, though he can be in the kid's life if he wants. Kind of like how he's kind of been hanging in the periphery of their family's life since he moved into town when he was 8. Now, I'm sure you're already seeing that this isn't the happy-go-lucky rom-com the back cover copy promises. We knew that the book was going to deal with infertility, but not so much how the heroine would be fertility shamed to her face by the entire town as her ex-husband shared intimate details of her medical issues with every dipshit in town. Like I said, there are many people who didn't mind and even loved that the heroine was constantly humiliated by her family and community members. But let's take a look at what major red flags readers and reviewers were quick to point out. And note, you can hit pause at any point if you want to read the full excerpts of the reviews. Okay, so the first one is from a 2-star review on Goodreads from Antonella's. And the parts I picked out were, this started so good, I loved it and thought it would be a 5-star read, and then everything went to shit. I can't remember when the last time I was this angry at the characters. And the reviewer points out specifically that she didn't understand why Gemma didn't ask Ian, who is her boss, to be her sperm donor as she starts dating him and she's been crushing on and has a mild obsession with. He is, of course, an asshole and everybody sees it except for her, including the other assistant at the self-help company that she works at. And it's quite interesting that the author made the choice to have the heroine date somebody else for 2/3 of the book. Like literally when I stopped reading at that 67%, they were still, they were like on a date and like ran into Josh. And for me, that really doesn't work from the romantic arc side of things, right? The whole point of reading a romance is to get to that happily ever after. And if the heroine is emotionally unavailable because she's focusing her romantic attentions to her boss for 60% of the book, then it does make it very difficult for me personally to buy into that happily ever after. And it does raise a good point, like this review does raise a good point, that the fact that she could have just asked her boyfriend or like friends with benefits, whatever kind of relationship she was having with Ian, to be the sperm donor if, you know, she was already engaged with him, right? Because that also brings up like the weird uncomfortable interaction in the book where she kind of tells him like, hey, if we're gonna be doing this, you should know that I'm going to have some other dude's kid. And Ian's kind of like, okay, which is perfectly fine. I love that for her because it kind of reminded me of the Red Table Talk. I forgot who it was, but some celebrity was like, I decided that I was going to adopt a child, and I then told my significant other, like, this is happening, and you just kind of need to be okay with it. I'm just letting you know because the kid will be around and it'll impact you too. But it was kind of giving me that energy, which I love to see. But it's really weird when it's supposed to be a romantic arc book and she's entangled with somebody else. And of course, true that somebody else is absolutely horrible to her. Like, he's constantly ghosting her every time he leaves town. And then he just like comes back and expects like sex and her time and attention, which was not great, especially since, you know, she left that horrible relationship with her ex who then spilled her business all over town. The other thing I like about this review is that it also points out that how in all the time she knows him, Gemma never reads Josh's comics and just assumes he is a poor dude because he lives with his dad. Like, girl, he is your brother's best friend and you work on social media and you never knew he's a successful comic author. That was also a huge sticking point with me. Not just because, well, like it has to do with her job and he's super successful, but because of how much like ascribing to him, her family, like her family's like straight out judgy, right? Like they judge him as like a fuckboy when he's 8 years old, and that's like fucking weird and really problematic. And so she's continuing, like after like 30 years of life on this good green earth, she's still judging this guy, but she's like, you're good enough to have a baby with, but not enough for me to like invest and care about you as a human being, and not to like, I don't know, not be so judgy when I'm gonna ask you for a favor. Like, okay, never mind. I'll keep my personal feelings out of it. And the last part of this is that overall, this book gave me every woman is validated by giving birth vibes, and all the behavior of people in the small town somewhere near New York where Gemma family lives is absolutely obnoxious. She is body shamed and judged because she is a chubby divorced woman in her early 30s. So yeah, that's very much the vibe here. Like I said, very stereotypical gender roles, and again, equating fertility and femininity, and not just fertility, but like actually like being pushed to have children. And I thought it was particularly interesting for me on a personal level because my biggest issue was that I didn't want Gemma to have a baby, which sounds really horrible, but it felt more like Gemma was choosing to have a baby as a stick it to the man situation, which is to prove that her infertility was not the problem that people were making it out to be, which is kind of counterintuitive. Like if she was just saying, you know, this is my situation, I've come to accept it, I'm not going to let other people shame me into not delivering on this kind of stereotypical promise or push for women to have babies, even if she was like, even if she didn't have like stage 4 endometriosis, she had every right to just be like, I don't want kids. But it felt very much like she was going to have a baby, not just as like I said, to stick it to the man, but also as a kind of surrogate emotional support person, right? Like it almost felt like Gemma was so unfulfilled by her relationships, which absolutely they were toxic as fuck. But it felt like she was then saying, I can create a human whose job it is to love me and they have no choice to because I birthed them. And that to me was a kind of icky angle of looking at why she wants to have a baby and how she would treat that baby, right? And tying in with how judgmental she is and her family is, I wasn't sure that if that child grew up to be not what she expected it to be, she wouldn't then go on to perpetuate the toxic family environment because one, that's all she's known, and two, that's how she's behaved on page. And that also made me like really concerned the whole book long. Like, if you do have this kid, are you having this kid for the right reasons? Are you going to be able to take care of it and respect it and nurture it the way it deserves to be nurtured? And not because you feel like this kid owes you to, be the loving, supporting family that you never got, to be the like source of love and undivided attention that, your past romantic relationships didn't give you, and to be what you thought they would be, that like, to me, that was like, wow, I was just like, please, Lord Jesus. She wasn't really into having a baby because she just loves kids and like wants to be a mom. Like, actually, there's like minimal commentary on her being a parent because she wants to be a parent. It's about how much she wants somebody to love her, how much she wants somebody to support her. It's very self-centered in a way. Well, I mean, it is self-centered. Okay, so the second excerpt review comes from Arini Miss Casually Reading on Goodreads. And she pointed out that something about the writing rubbed me off the wrong way. This was a rom-com with a storyline that hinged on the heroine's infertility. And I don't want to read a book that discusses something important only to have it glossed over and treated without proper attention and care that it deserves. At the same time, seeing that this is a rom-com, I didn't want this book to be depressing either. So while I appreciated the humor, I also felt at odds with it. I know the author was just poking fun, but some of the things that were said made me uncomfortable. For example, and like this is an excerpt from that first, as I said, that very traumatizing visit to the IVF specialist. And this is actually like the first time they meet him, and the dialogue goes, "How are you? How are you?" He asks. He pumped my hand up and down from across the desk. Then, "What a stupid question. You're infertile. That's how you are. Well, don't worry, we'll get you pregnant in no time. Would you like some water?" And I remember reading that and being like stunned because if somebody had said that to me, I would have walked the fuck out of that office. Be like, listen, I'm not here as a joke. I'm not here to be made fun of. And Gemma just sits there and the entire conversation carries on with that tone. And I agree that this is a rom-com, but at the same time, there are readers who are experiencing fertility issues or going through IVF or have endometriosis who don't get the necessary care and consideration that they deserve from healthcare specialists. So to have it presented that way and then to not address it, like, he could be a trash doctor. Absolutely. That's perfectly fine. But the fact that the heroine never addresses that consideration or fucking changes doctors, because that, like I said, that would have been my first reaction is, let me find a doctor who fucking actually takes shit seriously, is problematic, right? He is very flippant, and a lot of the scenes that take place in the IVF center were ridiculously unprofessional and frankly like baffling to me, because it just like, why was all of that happening? Like, this girl is going through something serious and it should be treated with the seriousness that it deserves. And the last part that I thought was really interesting was that Gemma was a judgmental coward. Agree. That when it came to Josh and her feelings for him, I didn't like the way she approached him to be her sperm donor. Same. Her proposal sounded like he was just some tool to get what she wanted. She was judgy about his personality and lifestyle just because he was laid back, always joked, and never took things seriously. He also temporarily lived with his dad, and he made and sold comic books for a living. Gemma obviously concluded that he was broke. I mean, what the hell? Not our heroine buying into stereotypes. And that's the thing. Like I said, Gemma is very self-centered and very judgmental. And on some level, I understand, like I said, she grew up in that environment. She's grown up with her mother talking about people and her in that same kind of judgmental tone. But going back to the promise of the back cover copy, which is that it's going to start as a business arrangement, and these are sort of opposites attracts who kind of have been in each other's orbits but don't really know each other. But there was no getting to know you, and she never made effort to get to know Josh. You know, it always felt like he was very much chasing her. I mean, of course, you find out that he's been in love with her since like they were kids, like since he took her virginity practically. But he was always the one saying, I want to be involved in this kid's life. I want to, show up at your apartment and go to appointments with you and, engage. And like, there's like so many great pieces of dialogue actually for a book that's like a single POV book, that hint that Josh has done his research into the IVF process, like when they're at their clinic and she's been inseminated, he's like, you're like, the research says that you should hold this position for X number of things. Or I was talking to your fertility group and I listened. Like he like listens. He actively seeks out information about the process, about how to make it easier for her, what could help, what doesn't, and he acts on it. And that to me would like made it so, that was such a jarring contrast to her who's lived like her whole life with this guy coming to every single family event, and never once does she ever ask anything about him, what he does, and really kind of understand where he's coming from. So that kind of structure where these opposites attracts learn more about each other, homegirl was not interested in learning more about him. Like she wasn't at all. Then there was a 1-star review on Goodreads from Ellie, and it says, I can't stand when authors try to make me sympathize with the heroine just by whacking up the trauma factor. It's just suffocating to read and doesn't make me want to pity her. It just makes me hate the book because not all women have to constantly suffer. Okay. And I think this is a really interesting point to bring up, because this is something I talk to my authors about, is that especially like even in a dual POV book, right? When one character has trauma that is so deep and so inherent, it makes it kind of unfair for the other character to overinflate their own trauma into something that's performative when compared to like the serious and depth of the other person's pain, right? So it feels like, Gemma is going through something serious, right? She's been battling with her endometriosis. I think she got diagnosed. It was like before she was 22, because that's when she divorced her husband, right? So it's been a decade. I think she's 32 in the present time in the book. And it's been a decade of her struggling with this, and it's something that she's been shamed at with constantly. So the other like almost pot shots that the author takes on the heroine through the other characters, like the fat shaming, the kind of mocking how she dresses all the time, is it's like belaboring the point of she's going through something traumatic. Like, okay, we understand she's going through trauma, but we want to see her get to a point where she gets to a point where she is not so traumatized, right? Like we want to see that positive change in her character arc. So to continuously like dump on her the entire time from so many different angles almost makes it futile. Like that internal character arc, that character change just feels like it's going to be a long arduous journey for me to ever believe that somebody who has that many problems is going to have a happily ever after at the end. Not because she needs to be self-fulfilled or something to get there, but I mean, like, low-key she does, but because she has to have her own trauma kind of parceled out before she could be, again, emotionally available to the HEA. These are the things that kind of pull the reader out of the book and be like, and self-insert, where it's like, okay, it's no longer funny, right? Like, the first time, maybe I was just like, wow, what a weirdo character cast. But at some point it becomes, no, this is too much now. Like, this is like mirroring a very toxic environment. Girl, get yourself out of there. This book should not about her having a baby or her getting her here. It should actually be about Gemma moves the fuck out of that small town and moves someplace where people don't know her, and therefore she is not getting toxic scrutiny on a regular basis. That's what the book should have really been about, right? That's not exactly the right mindset you want to put a reader in to enjoy your book, right? And so at the end of that review, they say, within the span of the first 2 chapters, the amount of random people who just openly made fun of her in her own house was bizarre. She chucks food on herself. She's told that she looks like a lumpy cucumber. She's labeled as desperate. One woman tries to force her son to go on a pity date with her, and another man told her, no wonder you can't keep a man. Like I said, it's just a lot. It's too much, and it makes me want to have a completely different kind of book. And then the last kind of excerpted review is from Preoccupied by Books on Goodreads, and it was a 3-star review, and it says, I was pleased that the book tackled IVF and also miscarriages, but I wouldn't advise reading this if you are infertile, going through IVF, or have suffered a miscarriage recently, because there are some things which may upset you and that that are a little unbelievable. For example, the being able to book for the IVF so quickly and easily without having to wait. On what planet? Also, the main character's lack of knowledge of IVF going in. She knew nothing about it, did no research, which was irritating. Saying that it was refreshing to read discussions on fertility, miscarriages, endometriosis, and some of it felt real. And I think what I really liked about this review is that it got me thinking of, talking about representation, is that sometimes when we are so hungry for representation, even when it's bad rep, at least it's repped, right? And so we tend to be more generous with bad rep in those circumstances when there are no options, just because at least somebody finally had it be like the topic of a book, at least this. And on one hand, yes, okay, it's great because, yes, I'm hoping in future we will see more books that center this experience. But on the same level, it now is also kind of normalizing negative or stereotypical depictions of what that process looks like. And this one, which is obviously not the best representation of the IVF process, and maybe the seriousness with which a lot of people take, fertility issues and making the decision to go through certain procedures, or choose to share that with family members, or go be really conscientious in picking healthcare providers. I mean, there's a lot of intention and meaning and effort and of yourself that goes into this process, and for that not to be represented on the page, and more importantly never to be addressed as a problem, is very, very concerning. And in this book, I think the author tried to circumvent that kind of representation by having Gemma join a fertility group, which I've forgotten the name of the group specifically, but it's other women who have been trying to do IVF for a longer time than her in like various varying things. And some of those moments are really great because some of them, like you have the one who's a bit of a hippie and she's like got all of these like herbal remedies and stuff that she's like, this time it'll work. But at the same time, it kind of made those characters caricatures when they were the ones who were really honest and forthright about the process and what it actually looked like, while meanwhile centering Gemma's kind of badly represented version of what the process looks like. And I wasn't sure how that, I felt that, about that on a personal level. And then of course there was more comments on the things that soured the story for me was the fat shaming, and was Gemma even overweight? The infertility shaming, where the whole town seemed to know about Gemma's struggles and judged her for it, where her family was really horrible to her about it. I know this can happen, but it wasn't nice reading about it. I had a real problem with Gemma's mom, who was toxic, interfering, and nasty doesn't even begin to cover it. There was a real lack of communication there, and although she redeemed herself in the story, I still feel salty about her treatment of her daughter. The gross men and community who made Gemma feel worthless was upsetting, but again, I acknowledge some people do act like this. And this goes back to my point of saying it's okay to say there are shitty people in the world and to depict shitty people in your character's world. But you have to acknowledge that they're shitty people and be like, that shit does not fly, or, you know, this makes me feel like trash. And kind of, it's more fulfilling to read when characters interact with those kinds of characters and they set up boundaries for themselves. Like, look, mom, I don't want you to talk about me that way. Would have been a way better relationship dynamic for me personally than her just letting her mom dump on her. Like I said, for 67% of the book, goddamn, like that is 2/3 of the page count. This woman was horrible for 2/3 of the book. Whew. I can't. So we can see that for a large chunk of readers, the discrepancy in the premise and the structure of the back cover copy and what it promised was an issue. It's a DNF or soldier through sized issue that was seriously polarizing for readers. And that's why it's so important to make sure your submission materials and your marketing messages create and send accurate and cohesive expectations for your book. If you follow my podcast, Path to Print, you'll be excited to know that Silvana Reyes, whose episode is coming out March 19th, and I talk about this book in a little bit more detail during our Mismatched guest episode, so you'll get her take on why she DNF'd this book, even though it was one of her most anticipated books for this quarter. But it really does go to show that each piece of your marketing and your submissions and your setup and your whole book, all of it has to work synergistically to sell a story. Otherwise, what you get is like a cognitive dissonance between what people thought the book would be about and what it's actually about. And there's nothing wrong with telling specific stories, but you don't want to confuse your readership, right? Like you don't want to sell it as one way that appeals to the wrong readership, if that makes sense. So this book is a good example of why sometimes reading reviews from like a critical standpoint, not your own reviews, but like other people's reviews for books can really kind of show you what readers are expecting and like your readership's interests and how you can market or position your book to actually target your target readership. And like, y'all, when reviewers do a review that is like this long and this extensive, it's a good signal that one, this is like a reviewer who's very conscientious and is like very in touch with the genre and market expectations for the like what reading experience your target audience is looking for. But also it means that they felt strong enough to sit down and write a review this long. Like that's strong feelings right there. This was not a throwaway review. is this the most representative of 2022 feminist ideals? No, not in the slightest. And is a 2022 reader going to go into this book expecting it to have some of those values? No. Well, I mean, yes, they expect modern values, but like they said, this is very 90s era type interactions. Um, yes, those people still exist. They're still alive. But again, there's no commentary on the dissonance between their expectations versus Gemma's own expectations for herself. And that's problematic. Is it a romance novel? Because, like I said, 67%, and she was still dating some other guy. Um, yeah, the romantic arc was not the strongest. And there's a Hia at the end, but we have a lot of conversations in publishing about what makes romance great is that we all know how it ends. The couple gets together, right? Or the throuple, or whatever, the polyknot gets together. Um, what is important is the journey to there. So if 60% of their journey is not working towards that here because the heroine or the hero or the person is otherwisely entangled in another situation, is it a romance? Have you given me the journey to that HEA that I come to expect with a romance novel, right? It seems like the book heavily relied on the last, I don't know, the ending to nail the book. And this reviewer particularly says it feels like the author wrote the ending first and then kind of tried to backtrack to write the rest of the book, which is nothing wrong with that, but maybe it needed a little bit more effort on matching that ending in a way that would create a full, satisfying journey and romantic arc for the characters to earn that ending, if that makes sense. That's all I have this week for this episode, for this YouTube video. Let me know if you've read this book and what you think about it. Particularly, like I said, you can read the first 4 chapters using Amazon's Look Inside. And like I said, the audiobook is available on Scribd if you want to check that out. So I'll see you guys next time. Bye.